Processes and tools dominate today's Agile discussions, but we are devoted to the individuals and interactions that make it work. From the beginner to the veteran practitioner, we have something for you. Welcome to Agile for Humans.
All right, welcome to this week's episode of Agile for Humans. I'm your host, Ryan Ripley. Joining me tonight, an eclectic panel of amazing Agilists. We're going to start at my upper left on my screen, Mr. Alan Holub. Alan, how are you, sir?
I am fine, thank you. How are you?
I am excellent. Thanks for being on tonight. To his right is Tim Ottinger. Tim, welcome back.
Hey, Ryan. Always happy to be here. Always fun.
Happy to have you back, Tim. Esther Derby is making another appearance on the podcast. Esther, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Happy
to be here with my dog, Izzy. So if you hear snoring, it's the dog, not me.
Excellent. We love having Izzy on the phone. And of course, top shelf Agile coach, Zach Bonaker. Zach, how are you, sir?
I am peachy and outstanding and all these positive words.
Excellent. So, of course, this is the Agile for Humans podcast. This is the podcast about the individuals and interactions that make Agile work. We focus on the people side of Agile, where sometimes perhaps the focus drifts away from. We're all about helping people find solutions and problem solving. I think this is the podcast episode that really digs into problem solving. We had something come up in our Slack channel. There is an Agile for Humans Slack channel where if you've been a guest on the show, you get into the channel. It's pretty easy to get admitted. Come on the show and we'll let you in. We have a lot of lively conversations, and one of them, actually, Alan teed off. Alan was talking about trying to create or define a formal framework that could replace Scrum. And so this, of course, kicked off a very long and interesting conversation. We thought, hey, this is exactly why we have a recommended topic channel in Slack to bring it to the podcast. So here it is. And it was really Tim and Esther and Zach who really jumped into this topic about the idea that, is it time to replace Scrum? Do we need something with a little more guidance but a little less process? Or from my perspective, is Scrum savable? Can we actually, or is there even a problem with it? And so that was a conversation that happened on Slack. I think there's some more nuance that a more face-to-face conversation could help with. I think I'm going to shift over to Tim. Tim, you've got your hand up. What can we do?
So there is a little bit of additional historic nuance, too. I had just come off of a rather long Twitter tweet stream, and we were talking about the relationship between Agile, which is a whole field of things, and Scrum, which is one way of doing things that is mostly overlapping with Agile. And so by the time this conversation had started in the Agile for Humans, I was already teed up with the how Agile is Scrum, and what are the parts that seem to dangle over the edge of what agility is.
Yeah, so Tim was already fired up. Alan threw some gasoline onto that fire. And of course, the rest of us jumped in, given our various stances on Scrum. And I think it was, Alan, what are you looking for with this? Because I know it was you who kind of, Tim was already fired up. You teed this off. What do you think about when you think of a formal framework that would replace Scrum? What would that look like?
I'm not sure, which is one of the reasons I brought the question up. Is there are a lot of things about Scrum that I don't like, and there are a lot of things in the framework that I don't like. So there's that issue. But I think the biggest thing I don't like about it is that there's no way for it to go away inside itself. In other words, any framework that I wrote would have a mechanism in it so you would gradually iterate away from the framework to something that was more suitable for you. I think of Scrum as baby steps, as a way to get started, right? It gives you a kind of prescribed set of stuff that in theory would take somebody from nothing to somewhere, at least. And it doesn't go further than there. And my experience with it is that it doesn't really work in the long term. And I don't know any mature shop that's really doing hardcore by the book Scrum. Everybody's evolved away from it. Everybody's got their hands up. So anyway, that's what got me started, is what I was thinking is, how do you do a framework that starts out giving people the guidance they know to get started, but then encourages them to drift away to something that works for them?
Esther, what do you think about that?
Well, I think, it's a very, very interesting point, because I think it is fundamentally un-agile to say this is the way to do things and it is codified forever. Agile foundationally was about learning, about adapting, about recognizing the problems that you're facing and creating a practice, having a practice emerge that address the current situation. So I love the idea of a framework that people can evolve away from. And I think one of the issues I'm seeing in a lot of companies is that the idea that you would actually evolve a process doesn't exist, other than you evolve it to your, back into your original way of thinking. Like, so you're doing Scrum or Fall or something that looks a lot like what you were doing, but with different words. So what to me is missing is that piece of continual learning and adaptation and understanding your problem deeply and devising or adapting practices that will help you solve that problem. That's what's really missing for me. Zach,
where were you going?
Well, it occurs to me in listening to this that if we want to be, adaptable, we want to move away from the framework, right? That would actually be a goal of ours, is to continue to iterate and discover. It occurs to me that, we wouldn't have any specific framework in mind in the first place then. We'd probably just have principles and such that would guide us towards, any state of being or working at any given time. So when Alan said that, look at Scrum as baby steps to get started with the Agile and start to discover and realize, I think to myself, well, that sounds great in theory, but if Scrum is really, truly baby steps, shouldn't it be fairly easy then for organizations to be able to start there? And I mean, your experiences may vary. All of you combined have, or I should say all of you individually have far deeper, experience than I do. But I've yet to see a company that I could say is doing Scrum by the book. So maybe that's
by the book is the problem.
Why is it the problem?
Because then you are relying on something that worked somewhere for somebody, but may not address the problems that you're actually facing. On one hand, I think, if you don't understand the principles and you don't understand, if you've never seen people working iteratively and collaboratively, then sometimes it does make sense to experience something so that you can actually have a different image in your mind of what's possible. But we're, 10 years into Scrum, 15 years into Scrum, and still doing it by the book? 20?
Well, nobody's doing it by the book, though. Right?
And that's kind of the whole point, is that nobody's doing that. So the problem with the phrase evolved away from Scrum is it assumes that somebody had approached Scrum. I think that absolutely what you end up with is a set of principles and values. Maybe something like, maybe the 4 values of modern Agile might be a good place for that. Maybe the original values from the Agile Manifesto are a good place to go. But I think that's where you go. I just think that Scrum is either very, very badly taught, even by certified people, or it's impossible, or it's not worth doing, or there's something else going on here, because it's just not happening. The Scrum shops aren't Scrumming. They never were.
Well, that's kind of where I got started, though, right? Is that it seems to me that one of the problems is that people don't know what to do. Is the Scrum Guide is kind of infuriatingly lightweight, while at the same time it's got too much in it. I don't know if I'm being coherent here, but it doesn't really give anybody any real guidance. And the guidance that it gives you is guidance that tends to move you in the wrong direction.
So I'll disagree. I will say that it is just simply too strong for any normal corporation to easily adapt. And in fact, it's so strong that the coaches won't even teach it.
Esther, you were trying to get in.
Well, I think part of it is that when people are learning a new concept, that's foreign, that they haven't experienced it, they haven't even imagined it maybe. And I think this is actually still true for a lot of people who are thinking about collaborative, iterative, incremental software development. People always hang stuff onto their existing cognitive frameworks. So if their existing cognitive framework is we have to understand everything very, very well up front so that we don't have wasteful mistakes. And we have to have people working in specializations because, that's the most efficient way to do things. And you have all of these existing concepts. It's very, very natural for people to take this new idea and say, oh, this is how it relates to what I already know. And then you get these implementations of Scrum that don't look anything like what I think this group of people would imagine Agile looks like.
Do you think Esther, do you think that it being so, the Scrum Guide being so execution focused, I mean, I'll just say it that way, like it really does talk a lot about what happens within teams and sprints and such. Do you think that because it's so focused on the teams and what people are doing, that it's just easy for that existing, experience from like the management structure to just retain the same thought process and just try to have people execute differently, and that's maybe its flaw?
I think that's what happens. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily a fault. I think that's what people do. They hang whatever new concept they're learning on, for the most part. I mean, there's some exceptions, but for the most part, people don't give up their entire mental framework of how the world works. They hang new stuff onto it. And they're trying to hang Scrum onto this other framework. Tim, you seem to have a
So I've sat in rooms with people who are in their second and third year of implementing Scrum.
For some definition of Scrum.
Right. So here's what happens. We get together and they're trying to talk about what the different roles in Scrum really mean. And I say, well, why don't we take a look at what it says in the Scrum Guide? And I kid you not, all of these people who were in management positions, who had been managing Scrum organizations for 2 years and managing multiple teams, none of them had ever heard of a Scrum Guide.
Or the Agile Manifesto, for that matter.
Right. So I think the problem is the people who are doing the training are not doing the training. These people had training. They hired, I won't say the name of a company, but they did pay a buttload of money for their people to be trained in Agile and Scrum. And I will tell you, it's not done. It was not happening.
And I would say what those people did was they spent 2 days in a class where they did not entirely incorporate these ideas into their, they were not able to shift their existing mental framework there. They just heard a bunch of stuff for 2 days that they hung onto their existing framework. And so then, of course, they go back and they do something that looks a lot like what they used to do. So I actually think you're saying something quite similar to what I was saying. I mean, I have visited organizations where a friend of mine who sometimes shows up on this show, Don Gray, said, it seems like someone hit him up alongside the head with the Scrum book and then ran away.
Well, which makes me think back with my original notion of a framework. What if you could define a framework that was more of a journey than a destination, where it actually took people through a process that got them into a good place in a way that they actually understood what they were doing as they were moving through that process?
We'd have to adjust their existing mental idea that there is one way to be. I mean, I agree that a journey would be super useful, and having people figure out, how do I apply these principles to my situation? How do I evolve my situation so that we have practices that actually address the problems we have?
Because I'm sure a lot of us have done that, right? I love
that idea. And it is in contradiction to what people have been taught for 50 years, that here's the end all and be all. This is the method that will save us. So I think it's great, and I think it's outside of most people's frame.
Zach.
Right. So let's bring it into their frame.
Oh, okay. Let's do.
XP had practices and things, and we taught people how to do them. And it was working just fine, except for the fact that it didn't have a marketing machine behind it, though. And so it didn't get the uptake. It's kind of a shame.
Yeah.
It's a lot of good stuff there.
And I have never seen Scrum succeed without solid engineering practices.
Well, there's a Sutherland quote. I just came across Sutherland himself saying exactly that somewhere, is that he was saying that he's never seen a high-performing Scrum team that wasn't also doing XP.
Which kind of makes you wonder if maybe it wasn't the Scrum.
Okay, that's interesting.
Zach, you had something you wanted to say.
Well, I heard us talk a little bit about some of the management influence that is exerted on people and teams when it comes to Scrum. A good friend of mine, really great person, one of the original mob members at Hunter, Jason Kearney. We were having lunch a couple of years ago, and I remember we were just casually talking, and he said, "Guys, what would be weird? What if we could go back in time, and if from the start Scrum was sold," because Tim touched on the selling nature of Scrum. The Scrum was sold as a management framework. What do you think would have been different in our world? And I thought that was an interesting question. I don't think that's a solution to call it a management framework, but I was just wondering what your thoughts were on, Esther and Tim and Alan, given the conversation around management influence on this system, the whole team, and the lack of understanding of what Scrum truly is. What if we started there? What if all along we had talked about positioning it as a place to start with, management and beyond the team?
The problem that I have with that is that traditional management and Agile seem to be at odds with each other as far as I'm concerned. There is no such thing as an Agile manager, right? The team should be self-managing. So if you start off talking about a management framework, that starts off with people thinking in the wrong terms. They're thinking about management and being managed and some manager telling people what to do. And, I'd like to move people away from that thinking, not towards it.
Hey everybody, Ryan Ripley here. We're going to take a few seconds here to learn more about TechWell's upcoming conference, Agile Dev East. And when we come back, more from Alan, Tim, Zach, and Esther about Agile management and more on Scrum. Looking for a conference that gives you customized learning options to explore Agile and beyond? Attend Agile Dev East, the premier Agile event taking place November 5th through the 10th in Orlando, Florida, covering the latest techniques and topics no matter your level of adoption. Immerse yourself in hot topics such as Agile and Lean development principles and practices, scaled Agile development, Agile teams and leadership, digital transformation, and more. As an added bonus, the event is co-located with Better Software and DevOps East conferences. Your one registration automatically gives you access to all three programs. This means you can choose from over 100 learning and networking opportunities to build a customized week of learning that fits you and your organization's specific needs. Be inspired by veteran keynote speakers, in-depth tutorials, topically driven concurrent sessions, networking events, and more to develop skills, supercharge knowledge, and re-energize your career growth. Explore the program at well.tc/Agile. Agile for Humans listeners, use the code AgileDev to receive up to $200 off any registration package over $800. Visit well.tc/Agile, use the code AgileDev, and I hope to see you there.
Well, so since you mentioned managers and management, I think, we do have a sort of traditional idea, again, about what management is. And Tim and I were involved in a conversation on Twitter today. Well, you were in part of it too, Alan.
Yeah.
I think it is far more strategic to think of management as steering the system and creating enabling conditions for teams. Unfortunately, our history and our legacy frames management as controlling people, controlling processes, and kind of keeping people in line.
Right. It seems to me that if you can get people away from that, you've got people a long way towards being more agile.
Sure.
And
I
that's the struggle, right? That's the struggle that I always have, is trying to beat down the tell you what to do guys and replace that with trust people to do their work guys, right? It's a hard sell.
I don't want to beat them down. I want to shift their thinking to there is something far more strategic than what we are currently doing. Because when you talk about beating people down and you talk about we don't need managers, you get yourself a group of people who are feeling like our jobs are threatened, our identity is threatened, our meaning is threatened.
Yeah, but they are.
Then
their jobs are threatened. But their jobs are
not if they are reframed as your job is steering the system and creating enabling conditions. In that case, their job is far, far more strategic.
Yeah,
I'm not up. Oh, go ahead, Zach.
Well, no, I'm really sorry to interrupt, but I'm saying exactly on your point, Esther, is what if you actually sold that as, rather than your job being in jeopardy, what if it's actually, there's more potential for your job to be even more valuable than it was before? How well can we convince them of that? I mean, because I see it that way, right? I see it as an opportunity to actually make their position even more valuable, not to make it go away.
It's hugely strategic. I mean, when you think about it, day-to-day supervision and task assignment is boring, not strategic. Seeing the system, creating enabling conditions, evolving the system, that's hugely strategic.
Yeah, but it's a different job. What you're describing is not what they do now. It's not their area of expertise. You're moving them into a different job, which is fine. Right? But it's going to be equally threatening, don't you think?
Their area of expertise, for the most part, wasn't management when they became managers either. It was writing code. I mean, that was, I was a programmer before I was a manager, and they made me a manager because I was good at programming. So I had to learn some different skills. I can learn different skills.
I think part of this, too, though, is the transition from management to leadership. And that's a common theme that's especially going on in the Agile community right now, is how do we get away from the Tim on a swing over there. How do we get away from the idea that we're managing people as opposed to providing the leadership and the support necessary to help them, enable them, as Esther said. And it's an interesting shift. I recently wrote about this for Agile Connection. I'll put a link in the show notes to that, about just 7 lessons that I learned from the manifesto about leadership that I think could help. But this is our struggle, right? So this is also why I think Scrum is working perfectly as designed, right? So Scrum is not a framework that is going to solve a single problem. It is a framework that is going to expose every dysfunction in an organization, and it does that brilliantly. And I think a lot of the Scrum butt instances, or a lot of these local optimizations or sub-optimizations, are in response to the dysfunction that the framework has uncovered. And is that really the fault of the framework, or is that the inability or unwillingness or some other action like that of the teams implementing Scrum, their inability to address those things?
I think it is part of
there's a real problem here, okay? That I really want to touch here. So you've got these people who are taking on Scrum as a framework. They're going to be doing Scrum. And what you find there is that the way they are taught and what they're doing and the way they're doing what they're taught doesn't include any of these Agile ideas of management. How does that happen that people who are certified and trained and out there teaching these things are giving people this crippled, half-dead version? It's almost like they're trying to inoculate the world against Scrum. You get a weakened and dead version that you can easily fight down so that you can resist the real thing when it comes along.
It's like a vaccine.
It's a vaccine. That's what I worry about with Scrum versus Agile, is often the Scrum butt moves further into the Agile space than the Scrum did. And then sometimes the Scrum butt is moving out of the Agile space. And if somebody doesn't understand, then they can't say, this is a good Scrum butt versus this is a crappy Scrum butt versus, by the way, you've never been Scrum to begin with.
Well, I think that addresses Ryan's issue, right? Is that Scrum might uncover the dysfunction, but it doesn't give you any help in fixing it. And I don't see much value in a framework that doesn't help you move forward. I'm not saying it do that.
I actually think because I think it enables. I think the fact that it brings a dysfunction to light. So back to Esther's point of mental models and how deeply rooted they are. So these are people that are, everyone that I've encountered that's trying to do Scrum or make a transition to Agile, and prior to that, they were doing things that they thought were right. And they thought that they were doing the best that they could in the environment that they were in. And so just the fact that we're uncovering a way to deliver software a little better and to show them the world of possible, I think that's a win for the Scrum framework. That's an enlightening moment. So just the fact that we created that opportunity, I think, is a big part and a big reason for the existence of the framework in the first place.
Here's my problem is the two-part. Number one, I don't think that Scrum brought it up. I don't think they've ever tried Scrum. I think that the dead version they've received has ratified, supported, and certified the way they are doing things. So they don't have to change it.
Yeah, but Tim, I think the problems you're bringing up are going to be inherent with any framework we try. I mean, even with modern Agile, I mean, you have people coming at you every day on Twitter about the make people awesome part. And then that's coercion and force, and that's not the right way to be. And then that gets twisted into a modern Agile butt that gets spun out on Twitter to many different branches. I think the problem you're highlighting is human nature, and the fact that we're bringing up problems, that we're trying to bring them into focus. That's going to happen regardless of framework, though.
No, I don't think so. The problem is that the framework is giving you a destination and not helping you get there. So people start flailing around because they don't know how to move. They don't know how to get from point A to point B. If all you have is the destination and you've never seen anything like that before, you're going to get lost, right? There's no way to figure out how to move.
Isn't that what the certified people are there for? Isn't that what a CSM is supposed to be? What about people like us, right?
Yeah. Well, I hate that, right, in the CSM thing, right? The whole CSM notion that you can get some guy who comes in and does a 2-day class and suddenly you're Agile, it's crazy.
But it goes back to the idea that there is an answer that you can buy off the shelf and just plug in to solve your problems. What we're not teaching people is how do you observe your organization? How do you understand your problems in a holistic way? How do you help practices and methods emerge that will help you solve your problems so that you can deliver better products and services to your customers? I mean, that Scrum did that for some people at some point in time in some context. I mean, it's just like we have all these people talking about the Spotify model. I mean, Spotify model, there is no Spotify model. It was something that evolved to solve particular problems in a particular context. And that's what we're not teaching people. And we're not teaching people that in some ways because we have been trained, we as an industry, we as a business culture have been trained to look for the one right answer for a very, very, very long time. And it's going to take time to shift that.
Yeah, but can't you have a framework that says that?
It would be great. I think it would be great. I mean, I said that earlier. I think it would be great. But I think that is a stretch given our legacy.
So what if we shifted the CSM, right? And we took all this stuff we're talking about and made the certified Scrum Master go away and replaced it with CSM for certified Scrum Manager? It just fixed Scrum, I think. Did I just fix Scrum? So we have the podcast. Yeah.
That's actually an interesting question because we got different ideas about what management is.
Yeah.
And whatever it is we do, this listening, looking, understanding, that can be taught. It would be cool if that's what people really learn. So I wanted to put another woot and a plus 100 under Esther's comment. But certified Scrum Manager, sort of any Agile manager, what do they actually do? What should they be actually doing? That's a teachable set of skills. That's probably more important than anything underneath it all. And actually, not just them, but team members. Because it's a tall order. It's a tall order.
Well, I think putting it all on managers is abusive, right? Yes. I mean, it's very paternalistic. The managers have to have all the answers and solve all the problems, so that everybody else is, doesn't have to work at looking at understanding those and understanding how they might contribute. Right? I mean, on one level, because of the power managers have, I think they have a greater responsibility if they had the skills to see the system and figure out how to shift the system. But it's not widely taught.
Yeah, but it's not widely taught because things like the Scrum Guide don't even hint that you need to be teaching it.
Well, I think it is
people are looking at that. They're looking at that for guidance, right? But they're not getting the right guidance.
Far broader than the Scrum Guide. I mean, this is a legacy we have with management. I mean, we have a legacy of thinking about organizations as vast machines, and if we just deconstruct the work into its component parts, and we design jobs, that address all of these little pieces, and the pieces work together. Everybody does their job. It will all work. I mean, this is a legacy of thinking about organizations and thinking about management that is, far, far longer than Agile.
So Esther, right? I don't think many people realize, or perhaps I was in the dark on this and everyone else knew this, but I mean, you were heavily involved in the formation of Scrum Alliance and in the early days of Scrum. Were these conversations happening then? I mean, was management, because management has been left out of the Scrum Guide. I mean, that's a topic that's just the Scrum Guide is essentially silent on. And so I'm not judging that. I'm just saying that's that's a fact there. What were these discussions happening, and that was a conscious decision, or was it intentful, or is there's something else to this?
Well, I was around for part of the origins of Scrum, and things didn't go quite the way I thought they would. As they sometimes do. I mean, good things and bad things come out, no matter what the intentions were. I think there were various voices in that conversation, and there were some voices that just were anti-management. We don't need no stinky managers, which I think actually was not helpful. Because that just creates a whole matter of resistance. But I also can't fault people for not seeing the holistic issue. I mean, these are folks who were working in software and found something that worked for them in software, right? I don't know if I answered your question. I think I didn't.
No, you're fine. I just find, these conversations are interesting. It's easy I think Scrum has the king of the hill syndrome to an extent. 90% is around the percentage that's reported on all of the Agile surveys about 90% of everyone that claims to be doing some form of Agile, they're claiming that they're doing Scrum. It's practiced by tens of millions of practitioners daily worldwide. It is the king of the hill. And so it is easy to come at it as Scrum is a failure, Scrum has done these terrible things. I still think it's successful. I still think it's brought a lot of wins to the industry. Now, are there improvements that could be made? Absolutely. But I haven't heard anything that we've talked about, including modern Agile, that does not fit within this very loose framework. I've heard nothing that couldn't be done within the Scrum framework.
There's a lot of things in the Scrum framework that I don't like at all, that I don't think are helping people. PO, the whole notion of a PO, I really hate. It seems that it encourages people to not talk to your actual customers by putting this surrogate in between you and the customers. And the PO is often representing the business, not the customers. It seems to me that all software projects are going to fail if they're not making the customers better people, if they're not helping them solve real problems. And it takes an exceptional PO to actually do that. So talk about 90% of the shops out there calling themselves Scrum shops. Well, yeah, but whether they actually are Scrum shops is another matter entirely. And so I at least see a lot of dysfunction surrounding the Scrum roles. And in the case of something like a PO, I don't even know that the role belongs there. The same with an SM is that there's a lot of coaching stuff going on in the SM role, but I would rather just see a coach and get rid of this whole notion of the Scrum Master as somebody who's supposed to be orchestrating the meetings and that kind of stuff.
So just looking at the product owner role, in many organizations, that was an extremely positive evolution.
Right. It's a step in the right direction. That's what I said. Baby steps, right?
But it's been ossified. And that's the issue that I think at least for me, it keeps coming back to. It's become ossified.
Yeah. That was exactly the point I wanted to make was, yep. I mean, Alan, correct me if I'm wrong, but does the Scrum Guide describe a product owner? as somebody who is really solely only looking out on behalf of whatever the business is asking of any time? Or is it asking for trying to be the lens and the balance between team and customer collaboration, maybe even being the catalyst that helps narrow the distance between customer and team, maybe even being the driving force for making that happen? That's what I get when I read the Scrum Guide and the description of the product owner. Now, I get it that there's no guidance in saying how do we, create that or make that happen. But, product owners behaving badly, so to speak, I don't know if I would say I think that that's, a problem of Scrum or an issue that I have with it. Instead, I kind of see it, well, I guess I see it more like guidelines, right, that have been offered to help us understand what business, mechanisms help us understand what business value could be, and to experiment and explore that in the context of our own system. We've just kind of, tried to take existing mindsets like Esther has talked about and just apply them to what we have today and say, see, we have product owners. And I get that isn't, very helpful, but I don't know if I could really call that a fault of Scrum. Does that make sense?
I think that
it makes sense to me. I mean, I just worked with a group of people trying to move them off during a job description for a product owner that was essentially a backlog administrator, because that's kind of where they're coming from, right? And the culture can only do what the culture can do. It can evolve to the next 3 steps. It can't make a leap of 20 miles. And I think that's one of the problems. Scrum assumes that people can make a leap of 20 miles. They can't. They can.
Even then, though, I still maybe I've got product owner phobia or something. But from my point of view, from a developer point of view, the thing that lets you get rid of an upfront design is that when the questions that would normally come up ahead of an upfront design process come up during development, there's somebody in the room who can answer the question. Otherwise, you've got to be doing stuff up front. And it's rare for me to see a product owner that can do that, who can actually come up with a definitive answer to a question that you need an answer for in order to move ahead with the programming. And when you get it wrong, the consequences of getting it wrong are enormous. As I've been fiddling around lately with putting slides together describing the cost of delay. And when you talk about a team with 6 or 8 people in it and you get a week's worth of delay because you got the wrong answer for a question, we're up in the $250,000 range in terms of the cost of that, both in terms of direct costs and in terms of the product being delivered a week late. And there's this huge business consequence for not getting a right answer to a question. And I read through the Scrum Guide and I don't see that. I don't see that even mentioned in the Scrum Guide. And it seems to me that's a critical part of what a PO has to do. So that seems to me to be a flaw in the framework, right? Is that
well, so on one hand, it sounds like you want the framework to be extremely descriptive and prescriptive, and yet it cannot be because it cannot anticipate every context.
Right, but I'm not seeing it even allowing for the way of working that I'm describing. When I bring this up in a Scrum shop, people are shocked.
I don't think it's prohibited. I mean, I advocate for people understanding their customer deeply, and for development teams meeting with their customers, seeing their customers working in whatever way they can do that. The more, the better. Within limits. There are probably some limits to that, but I don't see that as being prohibited.
But I also see in the Scrum Guide where this is explicitly called out, optimizing the value of the work the development team performs. Like that is an explicitly called out function of a product owner. I mean, that means that they have to be able to make the right decisions about the product. They need to be informed about the customer. Many times I've seen the customer actually is the product owner. And so especially in environments where I've been in either currently or in the past, very, very talented people fill these roles, and they actually are. I focus them in as a coach on optimizing the value. Now, perhaps other coaches, pretend to perhaps they think that, hey, we need a beautiful backlog, and that's how you become a good product owner. But I actually think in the Scrum Guide, when they say optimizing the value of the work that the development team performs, Alan, I think they're hitting on your concern directly.
Right, but they don't get that. If people don't get that, then there's something wrong with the Scrum.
Yeah, but the problem with anything Agile, the problem with anything Agile or Scrum is that you also have to engage your brain. And perhaps maybe that should be the opening line of the manifesto, because I don't fault a framework for when people read that and then they ignore it.
So now I get to tell you the story of it's one of the most astonishing Scrum trainers stories in my entire repertoire. That I was talking to this woman who was complaining about this class she had given because people were asking all these questions and they were challenging her. And I said, that sounds great. They were thinking, they were wrestling with the ideas. They were trying to figure it out. And she said, I want people to drink the Kool-Aid. This is exactly what we don't want. We don't want people to drink the Kool-Aid. We want people to be engaged in thinking. Right. And, when something becomes sort of a big money-making behemoth, that flies out the door.
Drinking the Kool-Aid is one of those wonderful phrases we have that it means to die. Yeah. So it's like, I want you to drink the Kool-Aid. That means I want you to be poisoned and die. The other one that's like that is I wish you were more type A. Because type A came from a study of what kinds of people die from strokes and heart attacks early in life. That's what type A means. Type B are people who live. So I want you to be more type A, and I want you to drink the Kool-Aid, or both ways of saying drop dead.
But what I did realize is a lot of people don't understand the origin of that phrase anymore. But
well, be that as it may, looking at the Scrum Guide, the product owner really is chief backlog groomer. And if you look at it, the power they have described here is they reorder the backlog, they maximize value by the ordering of backlog items, and they and the Scrum Master are not allowed to tell the team what to do.
That's I don't believe that's accurate. I don't think that's a fair representation of those 5 bullet points.
Well, that's sure the way that most people who do Scrum treat it. Right? People read the Scrum Guide, and that's what they come away with.
Here you go. The product owner is the sole person responsible for managing the product backlog. Backlog management improves clearly expressing the items, ordering the items, optimizing the value of the work the team performs. Now, notice it's the value of the work, not the way the team performs it.
Correct.
Ensuring the product backlog is visible, transparent, clear to all, and ensuring the development team understands the item in the product backlog. Nowhere in here are they given any ability to twiddle or mess with how the team works. It does say no one is allowed to tell a development team to work from a different set of requirements, and the development team isn't allowed to act on what anyone else says. Now, the development team, it says, no one, not even the Scrum Master, tells the development team how to turn product backlog into increments of functionality. Straight out, the the PO owns the backlog grooming, the ordering the backlog items, and the explanation. Cannot tell the team how to do their work.
Correct.
Team can't listen to anyone else.
The product owner owns the vision and the backlog and the customer collaboration, all those things related to product. The development team owns how they're going to turn that vision into working software. I totally agree with that.
Okay. Now, with that in mind, there are things that a team needs they cannot get from a Scrum Master or a product owner. And when we get down to the 5 T's, you've got to have a manager. So,
what are the 5 T's, Tim?
Oh, I keep forgetting. Not everybody reads everything I write. So, the 5 T's are time, schedule, talent, the staffing and training. Right? Time, talent, target, which is what is the project we're going to do next, or what is the product we're going to invest in. Okay. Time, talent, target, treasury. The ability to spend money rests in the hands of people who are given financial responsibility to spend that money. It's usually not a PO, although a PO can make a case. Somebody else is spending the money. And the last one is to deal in issues of trust, which is basically to give permission to individuals and to teams and to groups to give them their space to do their work. Those are things you're not going to get from a PO because a PO is subject to them the same way everyone else is.
And I would describe those as enabling conditions.
Yes.
Yeah, people have the means to do their work, which is I think a core one of the truly valuable things that managers can do is pay attention to those things.
Yeah, there's a difference between management going on and a manager doing it. In other words, I won't argue that we need to do all those things, but I don't think that we need one person who's doing them all. all the things we just said about Spotify, but one of the things that Spotify does is that there's a big pile of money, and when the team needs something, they just buy it. And they don't ask
granted them the permission to do so, though. That was an agreement made at some point in the hierarchy, right?
Right.
And there's some constraints around it.
Right.
But the team itself is doing the work that a manager would normally be doing as part of that process.
They're
right?
given some budget to use. So this basically goes back to give them the environment and support they need and trust them to get the job done.
Right.
So now I have another story, because I have a billion stories. You guys know that, right? So I talked this. It was actually not in our industry. It was in an oil and gas industry, and they decided they were moving to self-managing teams. They were going to reduce, layers of management. They weren't going to have these managers telling people what to do. So teams are going to be making all these decisions, and they had control of their budget, and they had control of their schedule, and they had all of these things. And they thought, oh, we have fully self-managing teams. This has got to be wonderful. And then they noticed that people were quitting. And they were going off to work for these other companies that had these traditional top-down command and control management structures. And it's like, well, why are you going to work there? It's like, well, I didn't pick this career so that I could balance budgets. I picked this career because I really like working outside on a rig. So I mean, there are some differences in domains here, and I'm not sure that if pushing all the decisions down to the team is the point where we want to be. I certainly think many decisions should be with the team so that they have some autonomy and they have some control of their own fate. So they are not, just order takers. So they're not treated as, the hands without the head.
Right, but the team can allocate tasks to somebody who they want to do the task in order to take the workload off of the rest of the team. But that's different than having a manager imposed from some external hierarchy.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Self-managing doesn't mean that everybody has to do everything.
So can I make an observation?
Yes.
No, you can't.
Denied.
I say yes.
Yeah. So what I've seen and heard, and I could be completely wrong, like I normally am, but we've brought up complaints and criticisms of Scrum, and our dialogue has proceeded to then go into what sound to me more like systemic causes and reasons that have nothing to do with the roles of Scrum, the practices of Scrum, the Scrum guide. So what's really going on here? Like if we got into this conversation to explore kind of the state of Scrum, maybe even a framework that gets us maybe to a better place of taking baby steps to organizations starting to learn with Agile. But yet every time we attack this framework, we seem to get into things that really have nothing to do with Scrum. What's really going on? Like what's holding it back?
So here's what I would say is that it is Scrum as she is practiced is not working for most people. We recently had a report on how much the CIOs don't use it, don't agree. They believe that it has been disproven or devalued.
Agile, right? Not Scrum, Agile.
Well,
right?
Most people,
both.
If you read what they're saying, they're talking about Scrum.
But
most people don't know there's a difference.
But I heard us say at the start of the podcast, where we all kind of unanimously agreed and laughed, no one's actually doing Scrum, though. So how can we make that statement?
Well, that's what people believe. So what I'm saying is not that it is absolutely true. What I'm saying is we are not serving the Scrum community. The people adopting Scrum are not being served well. The training is poor. The understanding of the information that is there is poor. We haven't even really touched on very much on the fact that the practices that are described, I think we've gone past several of them. The things that aren't described are pretty crucial. So I'm saying that A, people can't do it, and B, if they did, it might not be that good.
So once again, we're applying a framework that assumes certain conditions about the way work flows in, the way teams are constructed, the way management exists, all of these things. but they ignores the complexity of the situation. So it's just another case of trying to apply a solution designed for one domain in another domain. What Scrum does is it chunks things into small enough pieces that they're no longer complex, they're complicated. And we're looking at a whole complex domain. And of course, something that is useful and complicated isn't going to solve that.
So
my dog's snoring, sorry.
I agree with that completely. But isn't, because there's the challenge. I want to get your input on this idea. So Jeff Watts wrote a book called Scrum Mastery. And so for listeners who really want to get into, they want to be Scrum Masters, maybe you're just starting to become a Scrum Master. For listeners, that's a great book because it gives you wonderful scenarios that you can consider how to behave and such. So, but in Jeff's book, he had a statement that said, so while executing Scrum to the guide is not the goal, and I'm paraphrasing here, but while it's not the goal, companies that made the decision to use Scrum probably had some reason in mind to do so. They probably believed that by going to Scrum, they would increase their success, right? For lack of a better vision statement, if we go and we start using Scrum, we'll be more successful. So with that in mind, perhaps measuring yourself to how well you are doing Scrum to the book, maybe that could be a fairly useful proxy for success. So while, Esther, I agree that we're trying to fit a framework across many domains and complex, the nuances of organizations and even products, right? State of their products and what even market cadence type of, things to consider. But if we agree that we're not really doing it, what do you think about that statement? That maybe you're just measuring yourself against how well you're doing it to the book and visualizing that, trying to...
I don't think the point is how well are you doing it to the book. I think it is how well are you solving your problems? Right. How well are you delivering value to your customers? How well are you engaging your employees? Doing it to the book is the wrong metric, in my view. It's a very harmful metric.
Yeah. Which brings us back to why do we need a framework, right? Because every context is going to require a different way of doing things. So it seems like Scrum as a framework doesn't accomplish anything if our goal is to be effective as a unique organization with unique needs and unique requirements in a unique context.
I think what's useful about it is saying, here's one way to look at delivering software in an iterative and incremental way.
And this
is one of the tools, right, or one of the methods I have to organize my software projects. I could also organize them in this way. I could do it waterfall. That works for some things, but Y2K, for example. I could organize them in another way. This is one of the methods at my disposal. It's when it becomes the method at my disposal that it, I think, fails us as an industry.
Well, and I want to try to help Zach here just a little bit, because I agree that measuring yourself against the adherence to the Scrum Guide is perhaps a dubious metric. But whenever you make a decision to violate or to move away from the Scrum Guide, that could be an inflection point. So I truly believe a lot of the issues we're seeing, or Zach, when you're saying that, if Scrum's not the real problem, what is? I really think that this framework, the value of it, at least for me, is that it forces you to look into the abyss. The abyss looks back, and you either are going to run away from what you see or you're going to address it, right? And that's really what this framework does. And what this framework can actually help people do then is to make the optimizations they need within that framework to improve their world of work until they get to the point at that 2, 3, 4 year mark, which is what I really believe it takes for teams to get really, really good at playing the game of Scrum. Once they get to that point, they're in that if you buy into Shuha-Re, they're in that re-state anyways, that their optimizations are going to continue and go beyond just like a Spotify model, right? The Spotify model is a point in time. They're well past that now. But they've learned over a number of years how to do that. And I feel the same thing is true of Scrum. It is one way to do iterative, incremental software development, like Esther said. It's one way to teach us to break our work down into small pieces. It's one way to tell us how to collaboratively work with business and developers to actually deliver something, which is honestly a miracle in and of itself in most organizations. And then it's going to show us, the dysfunction in our organization and how we could get a little better. And I think most orgs, that's both a huge win and also ridiculously scary.
And I think we actually hit the inevitable avoidance principle more often. So if you want to tee that one up.
Yeah, we can tee that up. I'm not going to hit it just yet. I'm going to say this. When I say that's not Scrum, I want to make sure people understand what I'm saying, because this has been confusion before. I'll say, what you're doing there isn't Scrum. And they'll say, oh, you are a book reading purist that are trying to measure me against the Scrum guide, and how dare you hold me to a standard that I did not accept and did not ask you to hold me to, blah, blah, blah. You're saying that it's not good if it's not Scrum. And I'm saying, no. As a matter of simple classification, if you tell me that you're an electronic engineer, but you've never had any training in that, and what you actually do is scoop ice cream, and you say, yeah, I'm an electrical engineer, then I'm going to say, there's kind of bull there. That's not what you're doing. What you're calling yourself is not remotely what you are.
So why is it important that we call them on that? Why can't we just say, that's interesting. What problem were you trying to solve? Is what you're doing solving the problem?
Because that gets us in the whole Agile/Scrum has failed problem, right? In other words, if what you're doing is not Scrum and what you're doing is failing, and then you say Scrum failed and I'm proof of that, then we haven't accomplished anything useful.
That was my article years ago, if you guys remember that one.
Yeah, but I don't think we have to say, oh, you failed at Scrum and Scrum failed you and therefore Scrum is a failure. Right? When someone says,
people are saying that.
Well, and as people who have the possibility of injecting some other way of doing things, we have the possibility to say, oh, that's really interesting. Why are you doing it that way? Why did you think it would help? What problem are you trying to solve? Is it solving that problem? Well, describe the problem. Describe how this makes it different. Does it help? Does it not? And that's, I think, in many ways what you're hoping for, is that we help people think about what they're doing and help them think about how can we evolve something that actually moves us in the direction we want to go, rather than following something, just by rote repetition or by following, a series of steps in the book.
What you're describing, though, is being Agile, which is different than Scrum, right? In other words, in a sense, what you're saying is that Scrum has failed, and that we have to talk about agility rather than talking about Scrum, and I agree with that. But I think it's important to make a distinction between those two things, between agility and Scrum. They're not the same thing. And I think the more Agile you get, the less like Scrum what you're doing is.
And I know that part of this is somebody's wrong on the internet.
Oh no! Tell me this is true.
There's just a little bit of that in there. But then when you see, you go to a conference and you see somebody go, oh, look at this. We've certified 50,000 more people and we've done 20,000 more transitions. And when you've gone to those places and worked with those people, I don't argue with their certification numbers, but their transition numbers are totally wrong. In fact, I think that a lot of organizations that report 300 transitions last year are actually reporting 300 gigs that failed to bring about any transformation. And that just irritates me. Yes, for the people who are saying that, for people who are in the transition, who've been caught up in this or are not getting the value, not getting what they bought, not even can't recognize themselves in a description of a development team, I feel like they have been done a disservice. And maybe the current state of Scrum is that it's really not serving people in the way it's intended to. It's not being taught correctly. People don't understand what it is. And people are not using it to reveal their problems because they're not using it at all.
It's being marketed as some kind of silver bullet. You'll have 200% productivity, blah, And I think this is in some ways a very predictable trajectory when you go after mass market and when you go after we are the solution. It's predictable.
Yeah, but I think that's one of the reasons that it's worthwhile to abandon the notion of Scrum, because it's come to mean something that's not useful, and that I don't see the value, in other words, of talking about doing Scrum or going Scrum or whatever if what you're doing is not Scrum, right? Is that we should be, it brings me back to that notion of wanting another framework, something that gets us out of that, right? This morass of misinformation and people not doing what they should be doing and that kind of stuff. And the problem is there's a vocabulary associated with that that's an accepted vocabulary, and it's driving people in the wrong direction.
Can I tell you the best thing ever in the entire Scrum Guide? The description of a development team is tremendous. It's beautiful. It's great. It's powerful. It says they're self-organizing. No one can tell them how to do their work. They're cross-functional. All the skills necessary to create the product. No titles other than developer, regardless of the work being done. No seniors, no juniors, no lead this, no lead that. No sub-teams whatsoever, by the way. No titles. There are no exceptions to this rule. No sub-teams. No exceptions to this rule. There's not a web team and a back-end team and a UX team. You're all together doing the whole work, everybody that's necessary. Beautiful stuff. Individual development team members may have specialized skills and areas of focus. But, and here's the best line, accountability belongs to the development team as a whole, meaning that the team is an atomic unit. You assign to the team, accountability goes to the team develops, and nobody outside the team. Just above here it says, only members of the development team create the increment. That's beautiful stuff, man. I wish, of all the things people ignore in the Scrum Guide, this is the one section they should read, memorize, and live in the fullest.
Well, but that relies on some other enabling conditions, like having work flow into the team in a coherent way. I mean, I got a call once for somebody who said, "Oh, my Scrum team isn't working." I started asking questions. I said, "They haven't delivered anything in 2 years. They've just been arguing." It's like 2 years they've been arguing. Somebody needs to get in there and tell them, here's what you need to be working on. Maybe not how to do it. But so those teams exist in a context, and part of that context is how work flows into that team.
I want to go back to something that Alan said, where, and Alan, correct me exact your verb. I'm trying to paraphrase here, but it was that, Scrum is not Agile. So if I am doing Scrum, I'm not Agile, right? And I've never liked the phrase of, this is Agile or that's not Agile. But it's like, if I was doing Scrum really, really, really well, like I was actually, I don't, again, the goal not being by the book, but if I was really adhering to the book, I mean, we actually had an organization that operated in a way that could allow us to do the Scrum as it's designed. Would we not be Agile?
Sure. I don't think I said that Scrum wasn't Agile. What I said is that Scrum equal Agile is not true, in the sense that Agile is a big thing, Scrum is a small thing, and Scrum can certainly fit into the umbrella of Agile just fine if it's done right. The problem that I have is when people start thinking that Scrum and Agile are the same thing. In order to be Agile, you have to have a product owner, right? Sure. That's nonsense. Sure. And
I'd agree with that.
Sure. And all the misinformation that's out there, you'd said that, Scrum is basically so subverted now with, and I agree, right? I mean, we're just taking all of it as factual Scrum. All these horrible experiences. People are writing articles about as soon as they went to Scrum, the stock dropped by 90%, all this garbage, right?
Right.
But since I've been counting, since 2009, it's on a secular pattern. It's in cycles. Every year, annually, there's a new article that gets posted about how Agile is dead.
Right.
So there's so much misinformation about Agile too. So why don't we just throw out Agile then too? Why
love to.
They're trying to save it.
I'd love to. I'd love to have another word. I want another word. Right. The problem with another word is that the other word is going to get perverted around to mean the same way that Agile has been perverted.
So we need to teach. We need to focus on helping people to think seriously and systemically about their organizations and their issues, rather than handing them, here's this thing. If you just do this, it will solve your problems.
Yeah. No, I agree with that.
Yeah. No. Okay. I think we're
all in violent agreement here.
So mostly back in the days when I was becoming invited to speak to conferences about Take Back Agile more, I thought, to be fair, I should go and collect up all of the counter arguments about it that I can. And I read every article for about 7 or 8 or 10 pages back that I could find, in the Google searches, and the people would refer to me about. Went to Reddit, went to any place where people would complain about it, and I read the articles about how Agile is bad and how Agile sucks and how horrible Agile is. Every single one was a poor implementation of Scrum. I did not see one article about bad XP or about bad Crystal or about bad any other kind. They were all Scrum articles. I'm not saying that Scrum is bad, but I'm saying that bad Scrum is bad, and the kind of Agile people hate is almost, as far as I can tell, universally bad Scrum.
Yeah, I agree. It's the vast
because it kind of owns the airspace.
Yeah, but it's more than that, because Scrum has become bad Scrum. In other words, I hear Ryan's argument about how Scrum is, at least in theory, a good way to go, but I don't see anybody doing it. So Scrum to me is not what it says in the Scrum Guide. Scrum is what people are actually doing and calling Scrum, and that doesn't have much value as far as I'm concerned.
So I feel like we've gone in a circle at this point.
So let me ask this question then, not a circle. So you talked about a new framework, and you said I have a problem with the product owner and stuff. Alan, what would be, in your opinion, what would be the one thing that you would take away, add, change, or whatever to Scrum to improve the, I don't want to say adoption, but just to improve people and organizations' ability to use Scrum? It's
rigidity. It's kind of, again, we're kind of going circular here, but if you look at the section of the Scrum Guide, I don't have it in front of me, but if you look at the section on retrospectives, a retrospective, from my point of view, should really be a Kaizen process, which means that if you think about what you're doing and what's in the way is something that is part of the Scrum Guide, then it should go. But you look at the Scrum Guide retrospective section, and it says that's the one thing you can't change. It still has to be within the bounds that are set by the Scrum Guide, any changes that you make. And that kind of prescription is something that I really don't like. I think it really should go. Is that the Scrum makes the fallacy of Scrum, I think, is that there is a way to do things. And I don't believe that, right? So and that's the problem that I have with it, is that it is prescriptive.
If only we had someone here who was really knowledgeable about retrospectives.
Yeah.
Yeah. What if we did?
Yeah.
The retro topic is probably a great future podcast. I think at this point, though, not to be too prescriptive, but I think we've reached our time box for the night.
Yeah, we're kind of in a circle.
Yeah, we're getting to where we're kind of circling back to the previous discussion. I think it's I think the journey was interesting. I think we all were able to get our points out, which is, for 5 opinionated, bright people, that's hard to do.
Aww.
Oh, all of you. So I think we all did a nice job, managing this conversation. And it is interesting. Scrum is the 300-pound gorilla in the room. It is the prime topic in the Agile space. It's there's a lot of bad Scrum out there. I think there's a lot of good Scrum out there. I think there's definitely room for improvement in the way that we train, teach, coach, and perform the game of Scrum. And I hope that we are able to work collaboratively and valuably in a direction of improving that world of work, because Scrum is here, and it's not going away. And if it will either be something that teams embrace to do amazing things with, or it will be to the detriment of a team. And I hope that we find ways to improve the world of work and make sure that more teams are helped than harmed. And that would be my wish. And I hope that, I doubt any of you would disagree with that. So, but I do want to thank all of you for having this conversation. I think it is fun to bat around the ideas of Scrum. And I hope the listeners enjoyed it. At this point of the show, I think all of you are veterans of the show by now. And so this is the time where you're free to give your final thoughts on the topic, promote anything that you have going on, anything that you want to get in front of the listeners. The floor is yours, and I'd like to start with Esther or someone else.
Well, what I've got going on is Don Gray and I continue to work with our Coaching Beyond the Team workshop. which is for people who want to influence the system outside the team. It's all about how to understand, how to reason about, how to depict your system in a way that can engage other people in problem solving. And we've also picked up the mantle of PSL. So we are going to be doing a PSL class. Don and I are in November. Unfortunately, Jerry's health isn't good enough to be there, so he's asked Don and me to carry on.
Can you expand the acronym real quick?
Pardon? Problem-solving leadership. So how do you actually adjust your environment? How do you observe, think about, and adjust your environment so that everybody can contribute creatively to solving the problems that you're facing? I'm also doing some work with team coaching, because team coaching is not individual coaching times N. It's actually a very different discipline. And I'm really excited about that workshop. Other than that, I'm out and about talking to people, working with companies, and enjoying summer in Duluth.
Very good. Alan, how about you? All 2 days. The 2 days you're above freezing, and then it's back to winter coats, right?
Oh, well.
Very good. Alan, what are you up to, sir?
I am working away on my agility class, which is going much slower than I wanted it to be going, but it is going. I kind of got bogged down in the first module, which is talking about the business case for doing Agile, because I find myself wanting to do an entire module that's talking about Agile without actually using the word Agile for all of the reasons that we have just been discussing, and that's been an interesting challenge. So the class is still progressing. That's at agilitry with an R.com if you want to check it out. And then I'm doing my usual training and coaching work, like I think all of us are doing, is that I'm coaching companies getting better at Agile. Is that the agility class, of course, started out as training. It started out as a 2-day class that I often do. The other things I'm doing in the training world is I'm focusing a lot on Agile architecture lately. Is that the notion that if the architecture of your system doesn't support working in an Agile way, you can't really be Agile, because otherwise you're fighting the code so much that you can't do things fast enough. So I've been working a lot with Agile architecture training, and then a lot of microservice stuff, which is sort of a subset of Agile architecture as far as I'm concerned. So I'll be doing a 3-day class on microservices for the SDD Deep Dive conference in London in a few months, for example. So, of course, I do all of that stuff in-house. If anybody wants to hire me to come in-house and do some training for you, give me a call.
Great. We'll get links to everything that they bring up here into the show notes so that we can check out Esther's workshops and what Alan's up to with his workshops. Zach, what are you up to?
So self-promotion is my least favorite thing. So I'll just say... All
right, Tim, how about you?
To the 4 of you and listeners who will be out in Orlando for Agile 2017, if you want to meet up, chat, get together and just talk about work or just anything, I'd love to meet you and spend some time. So get in touch.
Zach, should we do some kind of Agile for Humans meetup at Agile 2017?
Only if let's see, Tim is there, if Alan's there, Esther's there, only if you're all there. I just want to be with you guys. That sounds great.
I'm going to be there.
Let's do it.
I think we will have to figure something out. We will get something, we'll get it figured out, and messages will go out soon. So that'll be I'll own that action item. Tim, what do you have going on?
Of course, I continue to do workshops and training with Industrial Logic, my home. And in addition to that, I will be at Agile 2017 in Orlando. I'm doing 2 talks. One is a solo on leading knowledge workers, which I think is a crucial concept. Tom Davenport pulled up, and we'll talk more about that later. Also, I'm with Ashley. We're doing one on permission, trust, and safety that I think is going to be a must-see. I'm also going to be appearing later at the Cincinnati Day of Agile, so your old alma mater, if you were to pop down, or and that would be fine too. Otherwise, I can still be contacted on Twitter and via Tottinge, Tottinge at industriallogic.com.
Excellent. So I will get links to Twitter, all of those things in the show notes so that the listeners can continue the conversation with all of you if they choose. As for me, your host, Ryan Ripley, what do I have going on? Well, I'm actually hanging out with Esther's friend and my good friend, Don Gray, in South Africa next month. So, Don...
Oh, excellent.
Yes, so I am keynoting day 2 of Agile Africa, along with Faye Thompson, and then I'm also presenting the No Estimates movement to our friends in Johannesburg. So that is a very exciting trip coming up that Don, Faye, and I are heading out on. I will be at Agile 2017. I have some more TechWell appearances coming up, so I'll get all of that in the show notes. There will be some interesting changes for the podcast as well. We're starting to put episodes out on YouTube. So if you prefer to listen on YouTube or some other environments, we're going to get the podcast out there. No video, of course, just the audio, but just another platform to listen on, and a few interesting things in the mix coming up. So I'll try to, as they come up, we'll get those announced and out there. But the more interesting things are Agile Africa. That'll be, I think, a fun experience. Agile 2017, we'll try to get a meetup put together and meet as many of you as possible. And then, send in your questions and comments. What can we do for you? The show's always inspecting, adapting, and trying to improve. So what can we do for all of you? Send your ideas and thoughts into ryanripley.com. There's plenty of ways to either email or leave a voicemail for me. Happy to listen and hopefully make the improvements that are important to you. So with that said, Alan, Tim, Zach, and Esther, thank you again so much for this conversation. Izzy, thank you for the snoring. This was excellent. Your dog is adorable, Esther. Thank you so much for sharing. But that's it for this episode. Oh, don't be. This was fun. So that's it for this episode of Agile for Humans. I'm your host, Ryan Ripley, saying thank you for being here. Thank you for listening, and have a great night.
Thanks for listening to Agile for Humans. Let's keep the conversation going. Drop us a question on Twitter @AgileForHumans or visit agileforhumans.com.